Mon nom est David Hoffman et je suis le coordonnateur du réseau mondial de PNA. Ce webinaire, il se
My
fera en
name is
français.
David Hoffman, and I'm the coordinator of the Global NAP Network. This webinar will be held in French, but we're offering an English interpretation, so it will take a few minutes to explain in English
Good
how the
morning, good
translation works.
afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's webinar on gender-responsive National Adaptation Plan processes, maximizing the impact of gender analysis. My name is David Hoffman, and I'm the coordinator for the NAP Global Network. Um, I just mentioned that the webinar will be held in French, but we're offering interpretation in English. And you can choose to listen in English by selecting the interpretation option at the bottom of your screen. The button should look like the icon on the presentation slide that I'm sharing at the moment. If you have any problems with interpretation, just let us know in the chat box. Nous faire part dans la boîte de dialogue.
If you
Et
have any question or comment, do not hesitate to let us know. So as we said, this webinar will last an hour. You can enter your name, pronounce, and organization in the dialog box. So now, if we get more into details, I will present the NAP Global Network. We're really happy to have you here for this webinar called Gender Responsive National Adaptation Plan Processes Maximizing the Impact of Gender Analysis. This webinar will be split in three parts. So first, we will first touch upon the NAP process and gender analysis. We'll have three speakers from Benin, the Ivory Coast, and Chad that I will present in a few minutes. And the goal is to be able to work on the gender analysis carried out in the different countries, in the three countries. And then we'll have a roundtable, and we will conclude our exchanges with a brief presentation of the information note we are launching today on this subject. You can already access it by clicking on the link that my colleagues will post in the chat and is available in French and English. Today, we will have the pleasure to have four speakers. I'll introduce first my colleague Aurélie Senos, uh, who is Gender and Social Inclusion Advisor of the NAP Global Network and co-author of the briefing note that we're launching today. She will present the notes and lead the roundtable discussion. Then we will have Mrs. Anna Kofi-Cohen with us, who is the head of the Gender and Climate Unit within the National Climate Change Program of the Ministry of the Environment and Sustainable Development of Côte d'Ivoire. And then Mrs. Colette Benouji, director of the association Lead Chad and principal author of the gender analysis NAP that the network supported in Chad. And finally, Mr. Muhajid Wabi, head of the adaptation department and at the General for the Environment and Climate within the Ministry for the Living Environment and Transport, responsible for sustainable development in Benin. So we would like to thank them for their availability and their willingness to share their experiences today. So now we'll take a minute before getting to the heart of the subject. And for those of you who don't know the NAP Global Network, it is an initiative that aims to strengthen adaptation planning and action at national level in developing countries. And this network is funded for the time being by Germany, Canada, Ireland, in the United States. And it was set up in 2014, and now the network links more than 2,000 participants from over 155 countries. And First, we do provide technical assistance on the NAP process, and we facilitate self peer-to-peer learning and exchange on NAP processes, and by generating and sharing knowledge on the factors contributing to the success and effectiveness of NAPs uh, through these breathing note that we are launching today, as we said. And over the past 9 years and through these activities, we have did our best to highlight the role of the NAP process as the basis for effective adaptation action. The NAP process fosters coordination, sets political priorities, and mobilizes resources and monitors countries' progress on adaptation. And for us, gender is one of the key themes for the global ANP network, and we're going to focus on this theme today. So as you can see on the slide, you can see some key figures regarding our work. So for the network, it is crucial to mainstream gender into adaptation policies and actions, as gender equality is a human right. It's our starting point. And by promoting an approach that addresses gender issues, the network is also contributing to the achievement of the SDGs and being compliant with the Paris Agreement. And finally, this approach makes adaptation policies and projects more effective. As the IPCC has pointed out, inclusive governance that prioritizes equity and justice in adaptation planning and implementation leads to better and more sustainable adaptation outcomes. Therefore, the NAP process offers a crucial opportunity to combat gender inequalities if it is undertaken in a gender-sensitive manner. So what are the gender analyses we are dealing with? This gender analysis is one of the key tools for integrating gender into the NAP process, whatever stage it is at, such as the launch of the NAP process, implementation or evaluation, update. So this tool can be used at any stage. And the network supported 9 gender analysis between 2017 and 2022 at different stages, as you can see on the slide. For instance, in 2019, we carried out an initial analysis of the common themes between the different publications and consolidated the lessons learned. And today we are launching our second report, which looks at the impact of this analysis after a few years and the factors that can be used to maximize them. And now I will give the floor to my colleague Aurélie Senos, who is the expert on this subject, and she will give you more details about the gender analysis and launch our panel as well. So thank you, Aurélie. You have the
Merci
floor.
David et bonjour à tous et à toutes et ravi d'être
Thank you very much,
avec vous. J'espère que vous
Jane.
allez bien.
It's a pleasure for
Effectivement,
me
donc
to
pour
be with
lancer
you
la
today.
discussion, on va tout de suite
So,
avec notre excellent panel.
indeed,
On souhaite
before
juste
starting the
souligner
discussion with
d'abord
our
l'analyse de
excellent
situation.
panel,
Tout le monde n'a
we
pas
just
forcément
wanted
cette
to
expérience
highlight
dans
what
les
a
années
gender
20 sur
analysis
le processus
is, and also
NLP.
secondly, the common themes
Donc
of
pour l'analyse de
gender
genre,
analysis
notamment,
specific to
j'aimerais
the
bien
NLP
commencer
process.
et prendre le
So
temps
this
de
gender
définir
analysis
ces
works on the
positionnements
differences
différents
between and among
par
people
rapport
of different
aux
genders, for
autres
example, men,
et aux
women, in
sensibilités
terms of
du
role,
processus.
responsibilities, and
Elle
access
vise
to
aussi à
and
comprendre le
control
rôle et les
of
dynamiques de
the
genre et leur
resources.
pouvoir
It aims to
ainsi que leur
understand
influence sur
gender
l'adaptation
roles and dynamics
et
and their
les
influence
perspectives
on
d'égal
the
usage
respective
des hommes
priorities
et
and
des
needs of
personnes de
women
genres différents.
and men.
Et elle offre la plupart du temps une base pour intégrer la
and it provides a basis for integrating the gender dimension into policies, programs, and institutions with a view to ensuring equitable benefits for women, men, boys, and girls. So it goes for the development programs, the adaptation program to climate change. So these gender analyses have different goals. So when we launched our first briefing note and we worked on the common topics for the NAP process, we did identify four different factors, let's say components, which is an institutional and political analysis to mainstream it and to adapt it to climate change. Then the other component is a technical analysis, works on the links between gender and climate change in order to identify practical considerations for the prioritization, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation of adaptation measures. And thanks to these two political and institutional analysis and technical analysis, um, we did carry out an impact analysis for the NAP process and the formulation of recommendations for the NAP process. So these analyses are different from a country to another, but we usually do identify these four components. So thanks to this information, we will be able to launch our panel and to discuss the impact of this gender analysis that we have carried out through our network, and especially in Benin, the Ivory Coast, and Chad. There's one person who is missing today, so we hope he'll be able to join us a bit later. But for the time being, we do have an Coffee Kwam. So as David said, she's the national focal point of gender and climate and in charge of the Unity Gender and Climate in the Ivory Coast. We've got with us Colette Benouji, the association lead, and Mujahid Wabi, who works for the environment and the climate in the ministry. So now I will ask you to open your camera, please, so that we can see you. Thank you very much, Colette, and thank you, Anna, for being here. So now we will start this panel with the Ivory Coast. So the Ivory Coast did its analysis in 2019 when it launched the NAP process, but the document hasn't been published so far. It should be finalized very soon. So Anna, if you had to describe the major changes regarding the resulting from this analysis, what would they be? Thank you, Ali. Uh, Hi, everyone. So first, I would say that we were able to get funding for the project we submitted regarding the NAP. And since we launched this analysis, the program implemented by the Ministry of Environment helps different teams to mainstream gender in their adaptation or action plan using the results of this analysis. And our third point, we have been able to launch the integration of gender in the adaptation process. I said launching because it hasn't been completely included in this work. So thanks to this work, we've been able to launch a partnership between our Ministry for Families and the Ministry of Sustainable Development and Climate Change, so that we can have a very efficient integration of this question. Then we were able to work with the coordination of different actors working on gender or on climate change, as it was the case for Benin. All the stakeholders have been invited to join and work. And as you said, so the project carried out by Benin is about to be finalized. So I just wanted to highlight the three main changes for the Ivory Coast. Thank you. And now I'll give the floor to Colette. Colette, your opinion is a bit different because you're not a member of the government, but you're an author of the gender analysis in Chad and an active member of the civil society. So these gender analyses have been carried out in 2021. The NAP was published in 2022. And what are the main benefits of this analysis for the NAP process? Ah,
Merci, merci
your
Aurélie.
mic was off. Thank you, Aurélie.
Le Tchad, il dispose d'un arsenal des actrices genre et aussi beaucoup de
So Chad
vulgarisation de
can
rapports
work with
qui ont réalisé vraiment
lots
avec
of
changer
material documents and
Mais
stakeholders that
s'il n'avait
worked
pas
a lot
fait une
on this
distinction
subject,
forcément
but
entre le genre
there
et
was no
l'adaptation
direct
au
link
changement
between
climatique.
gender and
Et
adaptation or climate
notre
change so
étude
far.
nous a vraiment permis
So
de
our
faire ce lien et
study
de
enabled us
voir
to
donc les éléments qui manquaient pour
uh,
que cette
work on that
connexion
link
fasse déclic chez la
so
société
that
civile.
this
Et donc,
connection could be real
vraiment,
for the civil society. So the
c'est
benefits
vraiment que
of
et
this
visualiser
study
les comportements parce que le cas,
were real,
durant notre étude, nous avons encore vu que les normes
and during our
sociales
study,
et culturelles
we have seen that the
étaient importantes
social and
dans le
cultural norms
traitement de cette question qui
were
devaient permettre
a problem
réfléchir et
to
donc trouver
work on that
quelques
subject.
pistes à creuser pour une bonne intégration du
And
genre
we saw that it
dans
was
l'éducation.
a
Et
way
aussi,
to
ce
work
qui coïncidait
more in
avec
detail on gender and climate change.
du réseau global qui avait fait aussi des normes sociales et de changement climatique
And
une
for the
priorité.
network that made it as a
Donc, il y
priority.
a vraiment cette question. Et nous avons trouvé pas mal de choses et aussi des gens qui
So
ont enfin compris que ce qu'ils font n'était pas seulement
we did understand
l'adaptation parce qu'il y a
that
beaucoup de sociétés
adaptation was not enough
civiles ou bien même le gouvernement qui a des projets, mais on parle
because
souvent
several
de
societies or
de
governments have
subsistance, on donne
projects,
des noms, mais en réalité, c'était des projets d'adaptation. Vous
but
savez,
these were
si on
adaptation
prend vraiment dans les
projects.
cultures maraîchères ou bien dans les projets de cueillette et tout ça, il faut
So
parler avec les autres pour comprendre que
it is
quand on
important
parle
to
d'adaptation,
be in touch with the people to understand
représente un tout
these
qui doit accompagner ce processus
processes
parce que le changement climatique est
and
là
what are the
et
main
c'est devenu
sectors
un
that
enjeu.
are
On a
involved.
réussi à mettre les deux dans cette étude. Donc, je crois que c'est vraiment
So we're able to
cette
gather
idée
those
était
two subjects in one single study, and it
intéressante.
was really important for our process. Thank you. Thank you, Colette. When we wrote this note, you did highlight that some women that did that were part of this survey were more concerned by climate change and now are more present uh, following this analysis. So the report is important, but the process as well, in order to strengthen the people of different genders and this NAP process, which is usually a high-level process. So it was really useful, and we can see that the gender has been better integrated in this process or was a starting point. Could you mention two or three factors that really helped those changes, or one or two key factors? Maybe Colette first, and then we will give the floor to Anna.
Et moi, je citerai en premier le bon timing
First, I will
qui
mention
a
the
contribué à
good
l'efficacité de cette étude parce
timing
que l'étude
that really helped the
a
inclusivity of this
commencé
study,
avec le
because this
processus
process
DNA
started
communautaire au
with
Tchad.
the
Donc, ça a permis aux
initial
différentes
NAP
personnes de
process in Chad,
travailler en
so
synergie
that really
avec les
enabled us
autorités
to
et
work all
les
together with
acteurs
all
du
the
développement
consultants and the
intègrent
stakeholders that were
les différentes
concerned by the
activités.
NAP
Et
process.
dans l'étude, le candidat qui
And
a dirigé le PNA
I know that
reprend totalement le document et aujourd'hui, ce
the
sont des bons
this is a
acteurs
very well
pour
understood document.
l'intégration du genre
Now they
dans
can
le
work with
PNA.
different
Et
partners for the
merci pour
integration
cette
of gender
activité et
into
grâce
the
aux services
NAP.
qu'on a pu
And thanks
solliciter
to
et à l'aide
several
des services,
workshops
cela
and
fait
the
aussi très
involvement of civil
concret
society,
parce que
there's
la société
an
civile
inclusivity
et les
factor
acteurs publics se sont mis
that
ensemble
stands out
vraiment
because
dans ce document.
these different stakeholders have
Moi,
worked
quand j'ai
together
lu
for that.
l'autodescription de
So
ce document, parce que c'est vraiment moi qui l'ai écrit,
sometimes
ça
it
m'a
is difficult for me to say that I'm the co-author of this document because it was the result of a participative uh, work. Thank you, Colette. So yeah, so first the time, good timing, which was important before the finalization of the NAP, and the fact that it was a very inclusive project. And what are the other factors that were important for the Ivory Coast? I would mention two main factors. First, the leadership, thanks to the involvement of everyone on these subjects. So they all gathered together to work on these theme. So that was really the first key point. So as I said, leadership would be the first factor. Then the second key factor with the was the right implementation of actions. So these actions that fill in the gap. So they said this simultaneous action was really important in order to work on the NAP process. Well, these two factors were really important in any case for the Ivory Coast. Thank you, Anna. And now I'll come back to a point that we highlighted during the interviews we had for the drafting of this briefing note. We mentioned communication. Is it important, or was it important for the Ivory Coast? So of course, yeah, we try to communicate on different activities because we have to bring awareness on those topics such as gender and climate change. So yes, we did work on the communication aspect, but once it's done, I think will be better to focus more on the communication aspects when it comes to working on a strategy. So I think would be better to would be able to better communicate on that. Thank you. And Colette, what about the communication aspect? Any recommendations so that these analyses can be accessible and useful for the organization of social civil society? Because sometimes they just they are handled by governments or
Oui, tout à
ministries.
fait, Aurélie. À mon avis, le processus nécessite une communication
So I would say that this
et sincère.
process requires an updated
Donc, on va
communication,
donc
and
utiliser
so
cette
civil
structure
society
avec la communauté et même avec
can be
l'État
in touch with the community and with
d'identifier
the
des
state
espaces
to negotiate
formés du genre
some
et du droit social.
spaces and to
Elles,
deal with gender and climate
comme,
change,
comme elles ont fait beaucoup de progrès
as they
tant
did a
dans
lot
le
of
droit de la
progress
femme et
in
tout,
terms
on a
of
fait pas mal de
women's
marches.
rights.
Je crois que c'est aussi
We did win several
c'est
fights,
aussi un chemin, n'est-ce pas, pour euh, vulgariser les questions et les rapports que nous avons faits parce que ça contient tellement d'éléments.
and
Et je pense qu'on peut trouver des
I
nouvelles
do
communications
think
qui
that we
vont
can
aborder des
find
thèmes
different
des 2 dernières
themes
minutes,
in
comme
different
je disais tantôt,
spaces,
le changement
10,
climatique est
50-minute
lié aussi à
spaces,
tous les
because
secteurs
as we
et
said,
de
the
négocier des
climate
espaces
change has an impact on everything, and we're
pour
able to
vulgariser ces questions.
negotiate
Et
spaces
les gens n'ont
to
forcément pas le temps
communicate,
de lire des documents, mais
and
comment, n'est-ce pas, exploiter
uh,
et mise en format facile à
people can
comprendre sera certainement le
access
moyen
these documents,
de
and
se
this is
réunir et de se
a
rendre
way
compte de
to
mettre des
communicate
résultats
re
pertinents dans nos études.
regarding
Donc,
the results
je vois
we
d'emblée
got from
comment dire,
our
aussi, je
studies.
parlais tantôt aussi de réactualisation des études parce que
And I did
les
mention
changements
the
climatiques,
updating of the
évidemment,
studies because, as you know,
c'est
gender
quelque
is
chose
a
qui ont
dynamic
évolué et qui sont dans
theme.
perspectives
Things have evolved,
plus pressées. Donc,
but
c'est
some
vraiment quelque
there
chose
was some backlash as well. So
à
it's
continuer.
important to update these
Merci, merci
documents.
Colette. Et effectivement, on analyse des dynamiques et donc elles changent tout le temps.
Yes, we do analyze
On peut
dynamics.
dire qu'on a fait une
These
analyse il y a
are
2, 3 ans
evolving. So maybe the study that we carried out 2 or 3 years ago is not the same as today, or wouldn't give the same results today. And of course, government and NAP change. So these analyses are important at any stage. Now, before we give the floor to our participants for questions, I have a last question for Anna. In the briefing note, it stands out that the impact of these analysis in terms of investment and adaptation is a bit more limited. We do have more impact on knowledge, and but in terms of funding, it is more tricky. So would you have any advice or recommendation to facilitate the impact of this analysis on funding, especially for the people working on this analysis? Yes, as you said already, we can notice 2 things. First, this analysis hasn't worked or taken into account the investments that were made. And second, the vulnerability studies had to integrate gender based on analysis regarding climate change. So, what is the advice I could give or recommendation? So, for the people in charge very soon. So, what is important is to take into account the different main criteria for the funding. So especially for the people working on the climate change questions. So different elements can be integrated in the study. So we created funding for climate change. And then for the different communication strategy, we could communicate on data and key knowledge, including in these gender studies. Thank you, Ali.
Merci Anna. Et Colette, avant que nous passions aux questions
Colette,
avec
just
les
before we
audiences,
give the
est-ce que
floor
vous auriez
to the
une
participants,
conseil, conseil pour
do you
les
have
gens
any
qui voudraient
advice or recommendation
lancer une analyse de genre?
for the people who would like to launch a gender analysis?
Alors, si j'ai une recommandation
So if I do
aujourd'hui à
have
donner
a
aux gens
recommendation or an
pour
advice to give
s'investir dans ce
to
domaine,
the people who would like to
c'est
work on that
éviter
topic,
la confrontation.
so
Nous
first,
utilisons beaucoup la
be
confrontation avec les femmes sur
careful
le terrain pour montrer que le genre est nécessaire. Mais dans le
with
domaine des changements
confronting
climatiques,
people, but
nous avons tellement
regarding the
d'informations. Et je pense
climate
qu'il va
change
être évident
topic,
que
I think we have
la
to work
recherche
on
focalisée sur le
some
terrain,
evidence
parce
and
qu'aujourd'hui,
proof.
il y en a déjà assez dans tous nos pays, les gens qui reconnaissent vraiment à partir des travaux réalisés par les femmes sur le terrain ou
And
des
all the
observations climatiques.
studies
On n'a pas
or
besoin de les
that
contrer.
have been
On a
carried
besoin de
out,
constituer des noyaux pour
and that
nous
could be for us
commencer
a
ce genre
basis
d'études. Parce que
to start this kind of
s'élancer dans des
studies.
études sans alliés, c'est
Because
naturellement
if you do
évident
that
que ça
without
peut
partners, it is
contribuer,
impossible. So,
que ce soit dans le domaine des acteurs publics, de la
uh,
société civile
be it
ou
in
dans
the
des pays qui ont
public sector or
des
civil
résultats
society,
concrets. Donc,
we were
c'est
able
c'est
to
ce que
launch
je
these
peux
studies thanks to our partners.
Merci
So this is the
Colette
recommendation I
pour
would
cette
have.
recommandation.
Thank you very
Et
much for
maintenant,
this
on va
recommendation.
passer
And now we will
la
give
parole
the
à
floor
Julie Tech
to
du CUSE, qui est aussi
Julie
spécialiste donc des plans
of
d'action et
the
d'adaptation et que certains d'entre vous doivent connaître. Le CNUD a aussi financé
the
pas mal
UNDP. So the
de plans
UNDP
nationaux d'adaptation et
did launch several
de normes.
adaptation
Et donc, ça
plan
va nous
and work
permettre
on
de réagir et de
gender
partager un petit peu cette
question,
expérience
and would like
pour
them
que vous
to
puissiez vous
share
lancer.
their experience with us
Merci,
before
merci à tous
taking the questions.
pour
So
ces belles insights. On va
thank you very much for all
commencer
the
dans
questions
10 minutes.
that we can read in the chat.
Donc, Julie, la parole est à vous. Merci beaucoup d'être avec nous.
Julie, you have the floor.
Bonsoir. Il est un petit peu tard là où je suis,
Hi,
donc
it's a bit
c'est parfois un peu
late
sombre.
where I am, so I'm sorry if
En tout
it's
cas,
a
enchanté
bit
d'organiser ceci et
dark.
d'être
In any
parmi
case,
vous.
I'm
Et
delighted to
effectivement,
be
je
with
reconnais pas
you,
mal de noms dans les participants.
and I
Et
do recognize several names
donc,
among
merci
the
au Network of Nature de
panelists
m'avoir
and
donné
participants. So
l'occasion
I'd like to
de
thank the network to
d'éclairer
give
un
me
petit
the
peu sur
opportunity
l'accent qu'on a mis
to
pour remettre sur le genre au Bénin,
mention and
donc notamment
highlight
mais aussi au Tchad, au Sénégal,
the work we did on the gender in
sur
Benin, the Ivory
sur la
Coast, the
question
Chad, and
une intégration du genre qui a été qui a
the
été développée
integration
avec
of
la contribution de
gender,
l'expertise du Global Network. Donc, en fait, ce
thanks
genre
to the EP network. So
il a toujours été très important pour le PNUD de
it
s'assurer
has
que
always been
dans
important
ces
for the
problématiques-là,
UNDP.
il y ait une intégration du genre. Dans beaucoup de projets qu'on a
It has always been important for us to integrate gender in our studies. So we
s'assurer qu'il n'y ait pas
did
forcément des
have an
contradictions
expert in
d'intérêts
our
et que
team. We wanted to
ces
go
adaptations soient
further
prises en compte
these gender
dans
analysis
les études qui étaient menées dans
and
des
take into
cycles
account
qui duraient
those
de 3 ans
elements in different projects in 3-4 years
Par
projects.
exemple, dans certains cas, alors le Tchad,
So,
on
for
a une étude
instance,
assez ponctuelle
in
qui était
Chad,
sur la base
we did
de
provide some help
mondial au PNA. Donc, c'était pour faire une espèce de première version d'un PNA sur les
to the
études à distance.
NAP
Donc, on a vraiment bénéficié de
process.
l'appui du NAPGLOBE Network. Mais dans d'autres pays, par exemple sur le
And
Niger,
in
qui
other
a intégré le
countries,
PNA, il y a eu un expert
in Niger, for
qui était
instance,
ici pendant 3 ans.
an expert was present for 3 years, and he worked at the different stages of the project, such as the different studies that lead to the launching of an NAP process.
Dans des pays aussi comme la Côte d'Ivoire où on a
And in the
on a
Ivory
pu voir un
Coast,
projet qui a aussi duré
we are finalizing a project, the 4-year project.
Sur la formulation en profondeur d'un PNA sur la base d'une nouvelle base d'information. Et là aussi, on
And
a
it was
fait
based on the latest information we were able to gather and an expert work throughout the project. We had the NAP expert. So it was crucial to be sure that we were doing more than a specific analysis.
Une attention portée tout au long des processus
But that we were focusing on the implementation of the project. So I have a question for the speakers and maybe for the participants today.
À quel point vous avez eu l'impression que ces dimensions genre ont vraiment été prises en compte dans la formulation du PNA.
Well, I'd like to know if these contributions were taken into account in the project that were launched according to you. So now we do focus on gender, we do work on awareness campaign, but maybe it is not taken into account as we would like it to. So
Merci
thank you.
Julie. Et du coup, ça rejoint une
Thank
question
you,
sur le
Julie.
chat sur à quel point
And
du coup les
this is linked to a
résultats
question
inclus le document du
asked
PNA.
in the
Donc,
chat,
je
so
propose
regarding
peut-être
the
à
result that
Anna,
had been
Anna et
included
Colette
in the
de
NAP
répondre
process.
voilà,
Excusez-moi, aussi peut-être pour
Oh,
préciser, ce serait
sorry.
intéressant de savoir
And
si cela n'a pas été fait de manière suffisante,
it would be good to know if it was not enough
les obstacles qui ont
and what were the obstacles for them,
Merci.
what
Merci
really
Julie.
hindered the
Du
situation
coup, Anna,
to happen.
est-ce que tu veux commencer?
Uh,
Merci Julie.
so
Merci
now we'll
pour la question.
listen
À quel
to Anna.
point
Oh, thank you, Julie,
les
for this
initiatives
question.
en Côte d'Ivoire, je pense sous le contrôle du coordonnateur NAP, je pense qu'il est en ligne, de tous les membres de la plateforme parce que le lien a été partagé.
So in the Ivory
À ce moment-là,
Coast,
ils pourront faire des rajouts. Il faut dire que c'est vrai que notre PNA n'est pas encore finalisé.
our
Mais
NAP is not
on a travaillé
finalized,
depuis le début.
as you know,
Non, c'est depuis le début, c'est-à-dire depuis le début du processus.
but we've been involved in that project, in that process since the
Comme
beginning.
dans mon intervention, je dis que on a même procédé à l'identification des indicateurs sensibles aux jeunes dans tout le document.
And we did work on the different gender indicators.
Le premier dans le document nous a été partagé. On a parcouru tout le document en long, en large, question, forme,
We did
fond et forme, pour pouvoir
read the whole
mesurer,
document
équilibrer. On a même
to understand what were
proposé
the key indicators, and we did
en faveur
propose some criteria.
Donc, juste pour dire que vraiment, l'analyse genre, nous a permis d'avoir certains, comment je peux dire,
So this gender analysis
les recommandations nous ont permis de pouvoir
was
faire ce travail-là
useful because we were able
former
to
les acteurs de la
do that
plateforme.
work and to train the different stakeholders of the platform.
Plateforme réunit les acteurs. En genre, il y a des
So
experts
this
en
platform gathers
changement climatique. Donc,
the
si on a
different stakeholders working on gender and climate change.
nous, il
But
fallait faire
not only so,
les acteurs
we had to train
gens
those people
changement climatique et les experts changement
working on gender, on climate change.
Donc,
So
de
in
la
conversely.
je pense, je l'affirme même d'ailleurs, ils ont quand même plusieurs connaissances en genre et changement climatique.
So well,
Donc, c'est comme ça que la
luckily,
plateforme
these people do
Donc,
have some knowledge
on a
of
été associé tous les
both topics.
concernent l'adaptation, pas sous, je dirais, la table des membres de la plateforme, qu'on puisse mettre les éléments du genre dans ce document. Donc, je pense que, Julie, je ne sais pas si je réponds à votre question.
So I don't know if I answer your question, but any regarding the obstacles, no, I don't see any. Thank you.
Merci Anna. Est-ce que
Thank you,
Colette, tu
Anna.
veux rebondir par rapport au Tchad?
Colette,
Voilà,
any
merci,
comments?
merci d'avoir Julie, que j'ai vu le
Thank you,
distance. En
Julie.
fait, ce que nous avons réussi à avoir, c'est que
Actually, in
le
Chad,
genre figure en priorité numéro 6.
gender is the priority number 6, I think, in the NAP process.
Vraiment la chose la plus fantastique. Donc aujourd'hui,
So this is
tout acteur qui veut travailler
very
avec
good. So any
l'Agence
actor
nationale
that wants
d'adaptation
to work on the priority of
vraiment à ce
the
processus
adaptation plan have to
à
work
cette étude
on these several
vraiment pour
topics. And that
vraiment
was
désigner les
thanks to these
objectifs
analysis, because when we were working on the process, when we were uh, choosing the priorities,
d'alliés déjà qui étaient là
there
et
was a
qui
group of
étaient
partners
convaincus de faire paraître
since the
déjà
beginning
dans ce plan
that
d'action
wanted to include
futur
gender
d'adaptation au
in
changement
these
de
first
faire
NAP.
modifiera ou améliorera
So I
sensiblement
hope
le
that it
deuxième
will
plan d'adaptation
still be
français
present in the
gender.
second
Donc, voilà.
National Adaptation Plan.
Merci Colette. Et effectivement, je crois que c'est position numéro 5 ou 6.
Yes, it's the
On
number
a
5 or
aussi la
6.
demande de porter une
And in
plus
the
grande transformation
recommendations,
sociale qui
we
est
wanted
dans la
to
perspective de
give
genre.
more
Et ça
importance
serait
to
du coup les
social
axes d'adaptation qui
norms,
seraient
and we
notés
can
dans
see them in
l'analyse.
the adaptation
Après,
action
pour compléter la
as
discussion sur la
noted
question
in the
des,
NAP.
des
And
différentes
now,
analyses de genre qu'on a pu appuyer et comment elles sont
regarding the
présentes
different gender
en
analysis
disponible,
we carried
elles sont
out,
plus ou moins fortes.
it's
Évidemment, toutes les
more
recommandations ne
or
sont pas
less
complètes. C'est
present,
assez,
because we cannot have
assez
all
drôle.
those
Mais
recommendations,
effectivement, on
including
voit
in the
trois
NAP,
recommandations clés
but
que
we
vous
do
avez
see
retrouvées.
2 or 3 key
Je vous en donne aussi un exemple,
recommendations.
puisque
So I
je cite un
do
exemple, mais par exemple au Togo,
uh,
ils ont développé leur
tell you,
PSE
so
orienté
please
santé juste après
read
l'analyse
this note.
avec sensibilisation
There
aux
was some
acteurs
work
qui
done in
essaient de
Togo
comprendre
after
cette analyse
the
et tous ces principes. Donc elles sont
study carried
mentionnées
out.
et là comme un document clé. Après, ça ne veut pas dire que toutes les actions
So that
soient
doesn't mean that all
développées de
the
façon
actions
documentale,
are
mais
related
en tout
to
cas,
gender in the
c'est un
NAP,
pas qui est fait et qui
but
contribue à
in
faire
any case,
avancer les choses.
some progress
Donc
have
voilà,
been
donc ça
made.
c'est quelques exemples et il y en a d'autres dans la note d'analyse. Je vois qu'on
So
a
these are a few examples that we can see in the briefing
quelques
notes. We
minutes
do have
pour
1 or 2 minutes
Alors,
to
je ne sais pas
answer
si elles peuvent
questions,
poser
and
la
then
question dans le
I'll
chat.
ask Anna and Colette if they want to answer the
Mais
last
j'ai une
question
question sur les difficultés
raised in the chat. There was a question regarding
auxquelles vous
the
avez fait face. Est-ce
obstacles
que
you
durant
were
ces
faced
analyses de genre,
with
est-ce que
during
Colette
these
peut
gender
appuyer sur
analysis.
ce point?
Colette, would you like to answer?
Oui, peut-être. Les difficultés, en fait, la première difficulté,
So what were the
je crois que
obstacles?
nos pays, ces pays fragiles, ont
So
beaucoup de
first,
priorités.
our
Et ils
countries
doivent en fait
are
s'apercevoir
faced
que
with
ce ne sont pas
several
toutes les
priorities.
priorités. Donc, la difficulté, c'est de faire
So maybe
comprendre que le
the main
gender,
difficulty it was
c'est
to
une priorité qui
make them
peut
understand that gender
faire
is
une
a
différence entre
priority
d'autres priorités.
that can
Donc,
have an
si à
impact on
travers
other
cette
priorities. And once
priorité
you're able
commun,
to build
qui baisse un peu
this
qui baisse un peu les craintes et
work,
ça se comprend parce qu'il y a la
maybe there
définition
are less challenges
des
or
défis, les défis de transition. C'est la première chose
and regarding the
la partie
transitional
commun
challenges,
vont mettre sur la table.
this is the first thing
Mais
that the public actors will put on the
avec le
table.
fond, nos
But of
documents,
course,
avec ce que nous fournissons
um,
et tout. Donc, il faut
uh,
partir là avec cette
we
idée de
have to
positivité pour
work
convaincre les gens. Donc,
in a
c'est
positive
ça
way
aujourd'hui,
to convince
la
people.
difficulté. Et de faire
So this was
comprendre en fait,
maybe one of the major difficulties,
de
and to
faire
make them
comprendre
understand what
controversé
gender was, because
et donc,
it's a
faire comprendre
controversial
les
topic
pistes culturelles
in
qui
our
sont
countries. So we do need
indispensables.
some
C'est vrai, donc
cultural
l'idée est très
clues,
importante et c'est comme ça qu'on
and we
a
had
fait.
to find a common
Après,
ground.
on est allé à demander aux Tchadiens et aux autres acteurs quelle était
And
leur
we asked
définition de
the people from China and other stakeholder
profondément cette
what
définition
was the meaning or definition for them of gender.
et sur
So we
lequel on
tried
avait fait
to
le
reach a
message
consensus
de
on which we were able
donc c'est ça
to present a
que je
message.
peux répondre ici.
So this is what I had to say.
Merci Colette.
Thank
Difficile
you,
de
Colette.
mémoriser toutes les questions.
So
J'ai vu
it's
qu'il y avait
a bit hard because there are many
donc
questions.
on va
I've seen
peut-être
different
donner
raised
du
hands.
coup donner
Maybe
la parole à Kemuel
we can
qui
give the
est
floor
National
to
Adaptation pour les questions de
Kemuel,
culture
the lead adaptation for the agricultural sector of San Lucia, so he will talk in English. But of course, if you need any interpretation, of course, we do have the interpretation. So yes, Camuel, can you open your mic, please?
Good morning.
Good morning. Can
Can you
you
guys
keep
hear
it
me?
short so that we can stay on time? Thanks.
Yeah, for us here in St. Lucia, the placement of gender on our NAP process has always been a priority for us. Whether it was looking at engagement of private sector or the public service as well. In fact, we have, as part of government available services, an entire department that is responsible for gender. And they've always been integrally involved in our national adaptation process. We do agree that gender is critical and all the dimensions of gender. The St. Lucia case in particular, we have to pay close attention to the males as well, because there's a shift in our society. There's a huge dominance of females in our society. So we need to ensure that all aspects of gender is considered when we are looking at the adaptation process. Recently in Jamaica, we were looking at the gender issues related to recovery post-disaster. One of the things that happens is very often there's a lot of pre-disaster effort made. You have post-disaster efforts as well in terms of data collection. But there was not necessarily much emphasis placed on recovery efforts to ensure that the gender considerations are considered. And so we took time in Jamaica to look at a tool that was developed jointly by the World Bank Group along with SIDIMA in Barbados. So that's a bit of work in progress. And we're hoping that when these final reports are out, that we'll be able to share them globally with our partners. But we're really glad to be part of this process. I'm going to commit ourselves and pledge ourselves to ensuring that all gender dimensions are considered in our development process. Thank you very much.
Merci, merci beaucoup pour cette intervention.
Thank you very much for your intervention. So I do not know if everyone was able to understand in English because maybe they don't have a headset. So you did say that you integrate the gender aspect, you worked with the private sector, you do have a department that is in charge of gender questions, and I worked on this integration. And another thing that have been highlighted in the questions that we do have to take into account the gender, so in men, because in Santa Lucia there's more women and a bigger participation of women in different bodies. So we do have to take into account the gender in all its dimension, as you said. And in Jamaica, you did work on the vulnerability post-disaster and the recovery phase. So you can take into account the question, the gender question. And now you're working on a tool with the World Bank, and that you hope that you'll be able to share it with more people. So I'm really sorry because we won't be able to answer all the questions in the chat. And we do have more details in our breathing note. Colette, so one final word, just before we give the floor to David.
Let David finish and conclude the meeting. Thank you very much. The final word is that we can't let go. We have to keep up and keep on working to move forward on gender with a great deal of enthusiasm. because we need enthusiasm. We need, not only on the basis of what we've done, but on what we have to do in the future. We can't let go. There are so many crises and interruptions of things that are even more complicated that risk of undermining what we've done so far in terms of gender. So we have to negotiate and work with civil society and NGOs is to negotiate different spaces with public stakeholders and others. And I think that Anna will be in agreement with us. We have to continue to negotiate this space so that we can finally get the evidence and the proof that will give us the space that we need without much of a fight. And that is what we have to do to move forward. Thank you very much, Colette. We have to have the space, opportunities to discuss and to move forward with things. Anna, do you have anything to say to finish? Yes, thank you. I completely agree with Colette. With my, what should I say at the end? I think that what I wanted to say, we have to continue. We have to continue the fight. We can't to let go and to just let it be taken over by the government and other stakeholders. We have to work, and the concept of gender and the empowerment of women, we have to take into consideration not only the needs of men, but also women, of course. And of course, the mainstreaming of gender in this has to be assured. Everybody has to work in all different sectors, all stakeholders, all parties, civil society, the private sector, and the population in general. And though we have to ensure that access to everybody involved. Thank you so much, Anna. Thank you, Colette, for your participation, for your honest sharing of ideas. They are really foundational. And I would like you to answer the last questions in the chat. And so for the questions that we were not able to answer, we will reply by email when we share the slides without any problem. So thank you so much for all of your participation, your question, and I'm sorry for those who raised their hand and were unable to take the floor. But to all those who are interested, you can find the summary note online, available in English and in French as well. And this is called Maximizing the Impacts of Gender Analyses that are specific for National Adaptation Plan processes. The link is in the chat, and you will find in that note examples from several countries. And so I will give you now the following slide, because we're close to the end of our meeting. Yes, indeed, the note brings together different examples from various analyses on the changes and the impacts that they exerted on 4 different categories. The changes on policies, does it have an influence on the strategies, on the documents and that were set up? Were these analyses made it possible to evolve practices to improve information about gender, or to make sure that the gender marker could be implemented? Was there an influence on collaboration and cooperation between ministries when you talk about mainstreaming gender and climate change? Did it have any impact on increasing funding for the work that we're doing? And we've heard examples from Chad and Ivory Coast, and other examples are available in the note that is available in the report. Maybe for those who do not have time to read the note, there are 5 success factors to maximize the impacts of these gender analyses. The fact that the process is owned by the key stakeholders. We talked about leadership over the past few minutes. Yes, indeed, it is very important for persons who are highly placed in the NAP process can be included in this gender analysis and can truly own and assimilate the recommendations and then transfer them to the process and into the documents. We have to have the right persons working on these gender analyses. And the second item is the commitment of the major stakeholders to guarantee the diversity of voices. We need leaders who can have an impact on the NAP process, but it has to be representative of the diverse sectors, social society, private sector, and the voices of both men and women, so that we can have a solid analysis that is highly representative. We have noted the importance of the proactive sharing of results of the gender analyses on an ongoing basis. Sometimes this analysis is shared just after it has been done, and then we file it away, put it in a cupboard. But that's not what we should do. We have to disseminate and share the results on an ongoing basis so that it can be alive and continue to be used, and that the data can be taken advantage of, so that the data can be also included in the NAP document. And we also need targeted recommendations in the NAP process. It's not the same thing doing the analysis when we launch the process or when we renew the NAP. So we have to understand at what stage of the process we're in, and we have to adapt the methodology depending on the stage. And we need ongoing efforts to support the implementation of the gender analysis in the NAP process. When you have a country that has a team that is dedicated and focused on this, it works much better. Or if you have a climate change platform in Ivory Coast and in Chad, that these platforms are highly important. And those are the 5 factors that ensure success. And we have 1 minute or one late, but I would like to give the floor to David. And I think that Senegal is here with us and has raised its hand. David, you have the floor. Thank you very much. Yes, as it was indicated before concluding, I would like to pass the floor to the national focus point in the climate change division of the environment ministry, and that works on the ecological transition of Senegal, so that she can share her final remarks with us to talk about the context of Senegal. We've just finished our gender analysis, and I'd like to have you listen to the few remarks that my colleague has. So I would like to hand over the floor to you. Hello. Hello. Hello, Aurélie. Hello, David. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you once again to the NAP to have supported Senegal in the gender analysis in the NAP process. We in Senegal, we launched the process in 2015 with a sectorial approach. And so the gender study came at that time when we were truly trying to insert ourselves in the process. We had already finished the National Adaptation Plan for the fishing sector, for the coastal sector of our country, and we were working on the farming sector, health sector, infrastructure sector, land transportation sector, and also the disaster response and flood response sector. But it was highly useful for us to do this process and to see the results and outcomes from this gender analysis. We have to recognize that there were voids, there were parts that were missing in this process, but fortunately, we had data from the fishing sector. Although we didn't have everything available, everything linked to gender, we nevertheless had quite a bit of data for the fishing sector, but also for the health sector, for the disaster response sector, for the infrastructure sector, but also the farming sector, because when we drafted the National Adaptation Plan and the report, we had an expert consultant that had contributed to the drafting of the draft document. And we had set up certain indicators in terms of training, funding, and we were able, nevertheless, to train women. Although we didn't reach the targeted number of women, we were able to fund certain micro projects. But in terms of this gender analysis, with respect to the NAP process, it was highly useful because we're involved in the process. We haven't finished yet. We have 4 sectors that have to be targeted, inserted in the National Adaptation Plan: livestock, tourism, biodiversity, and water resources, and the recommendations that I've made that enable us to handle this issue in terms of gender since the very beginning of our work. And so currently we're involved in a process of making this project more mature. And we're going toward the study of the gender issues, but we're in connection with what I'd heard about the workshop. I came a bit late here for this meeting, but nevertheless, I was able to listen to Ivory Coast and Burkina Faso, and I remember what they said. It is truly and a focus that helps to improve understanding the concept of gender, because here, at least most of the people, when you talk about gender, they think of women. But now we have focused on vulnerabilities and climate change. And so it's a broader concept. And these elements such as climate change impact both men and women. We have to take that into account. The other aspect that I wanted to highlight, and what I remembered from what had been said earlier from those exchanges that I listened to, was the plan of the Ivory Coast and the aspects of funding and the idea of having an investment plan that's available and establishing an adequate platform, which is something highly important because it enables them to bring together the different stakeholders and the different people involved, and also to talk about the synergy of different actions. And that was being talked about not only by Madame from Niger, is to avoid conflicts and clashes and to do everything based on evidence. If we want to establish policies on gender, it is important now to have adequate evidence based and scientific based proof. I think, I'm sorry, I was a bit long in my intervention. I would like to apologize I'm sorry to interrupt you, but thank you so much for having shared with us your experiences in terms of gender and the progress that you've done in your country. And thank you so much as well for sharing your impressions and reactions to what had been said earlier. So we are now on time for putting an end to the meeting, and I'd like to thank all the participants, all the panelists, and my colleagues as well for their involvement in this webinar. So once again, thank you very much. If you have any questions, do not hesitate to contact us using the email that's indicated here on the screen. And we encourage you to join the network. And you can find us on our website. We have a list. I'm sure that you've all received an invitation from the mailing list, but follow us on our social media, and we will be glad to share with you further opportunities to share as we did today. So finally, if you have any 2 minutes further, please complete the questionnaire that will appear when you leave the webinar. This survey, this questionnaire, will enable us to improve the contents and the quality of our meetings, of our webinars. And so now we would like to wish you a very fine day, whether it's in the evening or in the afternoon. It doesn't make any difference, but please have a wonderful day. And thank you very much, and goodbye.